Bard College won't hire anyone who isn't on a devout journey of anti-racism. Montclair University disbands their Bias Education Response Task Force, a great victory for free speech advocates. And in our top story of the week, Oregon high school students can now graduate without knowing how to read or do math, which begs the question, where is the education in the education system? It seems to be missing. Plus, in our woke tweet of the week, we'll discuss a former Canadian professor who said that we should make the lives of the unvaccinated people, quote, a total misery to, quote, crush their spirit and force total compliance with government edicts. Sounds a little bit extreme, but we'll get into all of that and more today on the Campus Countdown. Our number 3 story of the week comes out of Bard College, where if you are not dedicated every moment of your waking hours towards being a good anti-racist, you will not be able to work for the university. Campus Reform has the report. Bard College is telling job applicants to commit to furthering your own independent journey with anti-racism. The requirement comes from Bard's posting for an audience and member services assistant manager at its Fisher Center for the Performing Arts. All on staff are expected to commit to an anti-racism and inclusivity at the Fisher Center. This includes participating in any trainings when scheduled, supporting departmental, company-wide, and cross-departmental collaboration in issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and furthering your own independent journey with anti-racism. The job's normal duties include executing the day-to-day activities of the box office and co-supervises the entire box office team. The position pays $17.50 to $21 an hour and will be working 35 to 40 hours per week. So this story should come as no surprise. Colleges have been focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion for years now. And while there's nothing wrong with diversity in and of itself, such fervent attention to it comes at the expense, oftentimes, of students' intellectual development. Colleges have prioritized racial and gender diversity at the expense of diversity of thought. Right now in college, the narrative is, we care only what you look like, not what you think, when it should be the exact opposite. When colleges promote anti-racism, what they're really promoting is hyper-racial sensitivity. Anti-racism is a linguistic trick, a dishonest way of saying that race is a priority. If anti-racism meant what it sounded like, we would stop focusing on race and treat everyone as equals. But that's not what anti-racism is. Skin color, gender, ethnicity, etc. should not be a consideration for any of these colleges, but it has quickly become the only consideration. So when Bard College says employees must be on an anti-racist journey, what they're really saying is that there is an orthodoxy that cannot be deviated from. We see that with things like affirmative action, by the way. Here's a legal system that explicitly advantages certain races at the expense of other races, namely whites and Asians. So this anti-racism Bard is talking about is intentionally vague and dishonest. Now for our number 2 story of the week, we turn to campus correspondent Hannah Langler.
Thanks, Addison. In our second story of the week, Montclair State University has officially disbanded their Bias Education Response Task Force in a recent free speech lawsuit settlement. Campus Reform has the story. Alliance Defending Freedom, a nonprofit Christian legal advocacy group, just scored a significant victory for students' freedom of speech at Montclair State University. ADF attorneys claimed that several policies enforced by the university violated students' rights under the First and 14th Amendments. Rather than taking the case to trial, both parties reached a settlement this summer that will result in the effective repeal of the rules that ADF took issue with. There were 3 university rules that ADF believed the New Jersey school was unconstitutionally imposing within the context of it being a public institution. For one, Montclair required students to obtain permission from the university staff 2 weeks prior to holding an event in which they would speak publicly. ADF asserted that this practice unconstitutionally limited student speech by imposing a form of prior restraint on their expression. Second, the university also maintained a Bias Education Response Task Force that was intended to punish speech determined to be, quote, motivated by bias or prejudice. ADF lawyers claimed in their lawsuit that the designation for hateful speech was too broad and could be applied flippantly to suppress, quote, protected speech on important social and political discussions in which students regularly engage. Third, Montclair's Student Government Association created a class system for student organizations that could be used to inhibit the ability of clubs to obtain funding, according to the lawsuit. Since the Student Government Association maintained full discretion over this mechanism, ADF argued that the body could, and in fact did, use their power to penalize others based on viewpoint. This mechanism will be repealed as a condition of the settlement. This is great news for free speech advocates. You see, colleges don't just restrict speech by blatant content discrimination, although they do that too. This story really highlights two problems facing free speech on campus right now. The first is the bureaucratic muffler. Universities create a bureaucracy so embedded into school life that few question it because they don't want to deal with what they simply see as the school rules. The more rules to enforce, the more excuses a university has to deny free speech. The second issue is too much power to student governments. There's too much discretionary power given to student government associations, which are primarily and almost exclusively made up of college students elected by other college students. It really makes us ask the question, why should students have this much power? Why should students at a publicly funded university have final say over how those public funds are to be used? The takeaway from these stories for us conservatives is not to be cowed by a list of rules and a lot of red tape. Don't be afraid to challenge student government. Montclair had a weak case and was willing to settle out of court when their unconstitutional rules were exposed. Groups like Alliance Defending Freedom are stepping up to defend student organizations like Young Americans for Liberty. And Campus Reform is covering the story so that you know what rights you or your college student have on campus.
Thank you, Hannah. Now let's get to our top story of the week. In our top story of the week, Oregon students can now be shipped off to college without knowing how to do math or read, which is just fantastic. Our education system is really doing a great job with, the education part. Campus Reform has the report. This school year, Oregon high school seniors who cannot read or do math will still be allowed to graduate in accordance with a new law that suspends key academic graduation requirements. According to Senate Bill 744, signed by Governor Kate Brown, without any announcement last month, states that a student may not be required to show proficiency in essential learning skills as a condition of receiving a high school diploma, through the next three school years. The move follows Oregon State University and the University of Oregon going test optional last year, meaning that applicants to those schools are not required to submit SAT or ACT scores. Oregon students aren't alone. Thousands of American students will encounter declining academic standards when they return to school this fall. Nevada's Clark County School District, which covers Las Vegas, will no longer dock a student's grade for missing class, missing assignments, or failing to participate in class. Because late work will not be penalized, deadlines for students to turn in their assignments are not effectively moot. The University of Nevada, Reno and the University of Nevada, Las Vegas are both test optional, though the latter requires either a GPA or advanced high school diploma in lieu of test scores. In Colorado, the Douglas County School District has changed its grading scale so that a score of 52% or higher is a passing grade. The Denver Channel notes that this drop in grading standards follows Colorado State University and the University of Colorado dropping the requirement for applicants to submit SAT or ACT scores. As Campus Reform has reported, the coronavirus pandemic accelerated the pace at which colleges dropped their standardized testing requirements, at least temporarily. With campuses set to reopen in a few weeks, however, it appears the testing requirements at many colleges are gone for good. I'd like to remind our viewers out there that your taxpayer dollars are funding these public education systems. And what are they doing? A baseline, bare minimum requirement we should expect from funneling money into this system is that the kids would come out with basic competency, basic fundamentals of education. And even that now is too high a bar. To say that the public school system has abdicated its entire purpose is an understatement. Not only are they failing to educate, they're setting students up for total failure. The education system has decided that any challenge at all, any expectation at all, is too burdensome, too challenging. It used to be that education was, rigorous and you actually had to earn your diploma and work hard to advance. But now these kids are being taught that they don't really have to try at all or do anything at all. They can be wholly unaccomplished and unprepared and be handed a diploma anyways. It's a shame, and sadly, they'll pay the price for it eventually. Let's get to our woke tweet of the week. Our woke tweet of the week comes courtesy of Doug Little, whose Twitter bio describes him as a retired OSSTF staff, former Now Mag writer, history teacher, York U professor, trustee, who took to Twitter recently to inform unvaccinated Americans that if he had his way, he would make their lives a living hell. Quote, "My position is that we must make the lives of the unvaccinated a total misery and just keep escalating the exclusions until we crush the resistance and break their spirit in order to force compliance and so they learn not to resist government mandates." First thing that comes to mind here is that this guy's obviously very, very well informed of history. He's a former history professor. And we all know about the great prosperity and freedom throughout the centuries when people surrender their lives and livelihoods to every whim of the government without any question. If there's one thing we've learned from places like China, Cuba, Venezuela, Russia, Germany, North Korea, Hungary, etc., it's obviously that the government has our best interest at heart and are benevolent and kind. We all know the government breaking our spirits and making us miserable until we comply with their every dictates. We know that it's because they love us and they know what's best. What's better than forced compliance? Freedom? Autonomy? Individualism? Control over your own life? Nonsense. What's so great about being in charge of yourself, having your own responsibilities and dominion over your own life? What's all this freedom jargon about? So, all that said, thank you so much, Doug, for being an excellent spokesperson for the fascist regimes throughout history. Really appreciate it. That will conclude this week's episode of the Campus Countdown. Thank you so much for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment. It really helps. If you're not following us on social media, make sure you're doing that right now at Campus Reform on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.